Hi folks, My Life with Robert Buns, time again. Another episode with myself and Jim Thompson. Hi Jim, how you getting on?
Doing great, Douglas. Hi everybody. Really looking forward to this today.
Good. Well folks, tonight our guest is a former miner who's now become really well known for his poetry, his Scots language poetry, to the extent he's won many awards. He's a former president of Newcombe Buns Club. So tonight, cronies everywhere, please welcome Rab Wilson.
Good evening, cronies. Big welcome to you all out there in virtual world. It's good to no see yous, or see yous in a virtual way, whatever it is. So I've been invited to share some Blathers Way of the Night, and I'll do my best to do so.
Thanks, Rab. Well, the first question, as always, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Well, my name's Rab Wilson. I was born in 1960. I'm the middle of three wains. They say the middle wain's either difficult, but I totally disagree with that. You all kid. To my mind, it's the oldest yin that's the most difficult yin, but we'll let that flea stick to the wall, maybe. A younger sister that folk don't seem to have remember, our Laura, so she's the younger Wilson. So there's the three of us, and I was born here at Pulwhirter Nursery in Newcombe. My mother was Margaret McClatchy, and it was McClatchy's nursery, the Floor Nursery. My father, John Wilson, from your Kirk. So the family's roots go back, about 3-4 generations here at Pulwhirter Nursery, and it's also got a kind of Burns connection, because apparently Tibby Pagan, of Caw the Yows, was born here at Pulwhirter. So that's an interesting wee Burns nugget for some of you. But we built our new houses, me and our Jim here down at Pulwhirter, and I'm here within a stone's throw, literally a stone's throw of the room that I was born in. I was born in Pulwhirter Cottage. Old Dr. John McSween delivered me back in the day, and I feel very earthed here. I'm very earthed in Pulwhirter. I haven't moved far from my roots. I've got a lot of skilled friends and contemporaries that maybe went to uni and higher education, and they've all washed up in the four corners of the earth, some of them. But me and a handful of others have stayed kind of close to our roots here in Newcombe. I was part to the brain drain south for a wee while when I went to Sanquhar for about 20 years. But we got the chance to build a new house, and after that missionary work failed in Sanquhar, I decided to come back here to Newcombe. And as I say, I'm very up here at Newcombe. I love living here. I love looking out the window in the morning and seeing the same view that I've seen since I was a wee boy. The haunts, the Nith and Pulwhirter Burn, the Afton Valley. These are places that I tramp and walk and cycle very regularly, and they never fail to make me smile and bring me great joy and enjoyment. And I love it here, Doug. I love it.
Tremendous. So what is your view? Describe it to the audience.
Well, I'm sitting in my wee study office here, which I think maybe perhaps yourself and certainly Jim Thompson have been in our sanctum here at the Nursery View, in my wee office in the library. And the windows there look to the back, look to the Nipes. And so usually I can see the windmills, the turbines turning in the top of the Nipes, and sheep and coos, and the usual wildlife of this East Ayrshire. And I must say, with the windmill, I don't mind the windmills at all. They're a kind of Marmite thing, and some folk detest them, but I quite like the windmills. I think they're a useful thing. And I mean, they've been there for 20, 25 years, I think, out the back of your house. And there's hardly a day ever goes by when the windmills aren't turning. They're always turning. Folks say, what happens when the wind doesn't blow? But it's very, very rarely that the windmills aren't turning. So that's the view out my office at the back. And in this house here, I mean, if I go back 50 years, I'd have been sitting in one of the big greenhouses that we had here at Board. This would have been one of the greenhouses that I'm sitting in. Long gone, of course, but I've got vivid memories of that growing up in the flower nursery and everything attached with that. But out the front window is the Nith Valley. You can see, when the river's in spate, you can actually see the Nith flowing down the valley. And I can't quite see Corson Cone just where my house sits. Our Jim gets to see Corson Cone, but I got all the nice sunsets here. And I get the sun setting in the west and spectacular sunsets. We've got a room, a kind of sunroom here that gives it a vivid, full view of the sunsets, and they can be really astounding and spectacular. And that's quite an inspiring thing.
Tremendous. So you've told us about your brother and sister. What about your own family?
Well, I married Margaret Gibson from Sanker. Margaret was a gala queen back in the day in Sanker, and also a cornet's lass with the sort of the borders riding of the marches in Sanker, and she was a cornet's lass in Sanker, was very much involved in all that kind of tradition and history and culture relating to the march riding sort of fraternity right across the borders. So she was very much involved in that for many years. She works in she works in the primary school at Kellerholm. She's a classroom assistant there and enjoys her work, and it's a job that suits her well. We've got one of her family, a daughter, Rachel. She's 27. She did very well at Stirling University and has got a job in the film industry in Glasgow. She works for Film City Futures and has got a very good job there and is doing well. So, and very independent minded. I don't know where she got that from. And she's a very, very strong-minded feminist. So I've got to, being an old sort of a Buns supper man, I've got to mind my P's and Q's when I'm about Rachel. I tend to put my foot in it now and again, and but you know, it's a generational thing, I think. So, but we're all ilka day is a skill day, as they say, and it's certainly that for me with Rachel.
Very good. And mentioning school days, tell us about your school days. Where did you go to school?
Oh, school days. Well, I went to the Toon Skill, the Castle Primary, as it's known in New Cumnock, but it was always the Toon Skill. And when I started going to the Toon Skill, it was still a secondary. It was still a secondary school, and vivid memories of that as a child. You know, the big shed in the playground, and you had the boys' playground, of course, and you had the lassies' playground. That strange time where, for some reason or other, they thought that the sexes should be split up into their own playground, but that's all disappeared now. And you would have these massive games of football that we can all hamino, where you would get in coker a hen. I don't know if they use that phrase on me or young kids. You lose sight of childhood in a way. So, but twee you would, if there was a game going on, twee you would go up and shout, and whoever was organising it and say, "Can we get in coker a hen?" And they would choose one of your coke or a hen, and you'd been that team, they'd been the other. And of course, they had the big icy slides across the playground in the winter, and real quite heavy winters, much stronger winters than we get now. I mean, I can remember the Afton behind the Toon Skill being frozen solid, and the wains would nae health and safety then. You go down there now, and the gates are all locked up, and I think the wains are allowed to go to the Afton, really. But we just all went onto the ice, and you would play in the ice and crack the ice and do these kind of things. In the shed, I can remember the shed, it was always a rite of passage. When you got to about primary 6, primary 7, there was a kind of red sandstone block built into the wall at the end of the shed inside it, and you would run at that. It was all worn away with generations of New Cumnock wains running and jumping onto this stain, because it was a kind of rite of passage to run at the stain, jump onto it, and reach up and grab the rafters, and then you climbed into the rafters in the shed, and you could only do that once you're maybe 10-year-old or thereabouts. And I can remember up in the rafters in that shed, all the names written in pencil on the beams and rafters and on the red bricks up in there with I say, generations of newcomer boys that had went there before, and they'd all written their names in pencil. And it was quite I always find it a kind of sad thing when they demolish something and it goes away, and a bit of your local history is taken with it. And I wrote a poem about that, about the Toon Skill when they were rebuilding it, and because that struck a real chord with me, because just prior to them restoring the Toon Skill, I can remember going in to visit it and going in to the old gymnasium, and some of the boys here will remember the old gymnasium, some of the girls too. And it had this, very vivid varnished wooden floor, and the big ropes that hang down, and the wall bars that we used to climb up. And there was a kind of boys' changing room in it and a girls' changing room. And I went into this, and here were these stacked boxes of red, yellow, blue, and green. These stacked yellow boxes that fit it into one another. And there were a few of these wee round rubber rings and sort of coloured sashes that you put around your neck. And again, red, yellow, blue, and green. And of course, I think red was Connell, green was Bank, blue was Afton, and yen was Nith. What yen was Nith? Green, I think. Was it green that was Nith?
Don't ask me. I went to Cumnock Academy, so.
All right, you went to special skill, did you? That's right. You went to special skill, and but we had the four houses: the Bank, Connell, Nith, and Afton, and I was in Afton. I'll need to see if I'll see if I can find the poem that I did about the Toon Skill. Another vivid memory, of course, growing up in Polwartha Nursery would probably be one of the last businesses in Ayrshire to have a horse and cart. We had a horse and cart, and old Jimmy the Fruiter, and this was my uncle Jimmy, my granny McClatchy, whose own name was Forster. He was Jimmy Forster. They came from Durham. That side of the family came from Durham, and Jimmy had lost the two middle fingers. I think it was his right hand. He'd lost the two middle fingers of his hand in an accident working in the pits in Durham. I think a stone had fell for the roof and took off his two middle fingers. And his son, Peter Foster, that still stays in Newcomer, says that, oh, Jimmy, when he lost the two fingers of his hand, it was bandaged up and he was back at his work the next day, according to Peter anyway. So, hard time. But one of the things that when folk would ask Jimmy for a bag of peanuts, and he says, I'll fill your bag for you, and he would dip into this, and it was as if they were getting handfuls and handfuls of peanuts. But of course, you're forgetting that Jimmy had these two fingers missing, so they were only getting 2 or 3 peanuts at a time, I think, the way he was scooping them out. And there was lots of tricks and dodges, I think, going with the vans. But I can remember walking home for the skill as you did. There was no Chelsea tractors to take you home for the skill in their days. It was Walker's bus, and you had to walk for the Toon Skill down here to Polwartha. And oftentimes I would be walking up the Brae there, and Jimmy would come by with the horse and cart, and he would see me and he would stop and he would open the shutter at the back, and I would climb into the horse and cart. And I can now remember it was a big Clydesdale, it's big hooves clip, clip, clopping down the road. I can hear that in my mind as I think about it. And I would sit in the back and eat all the strawberries and eat all the cherries all the way down the road. It was great. So that was what I used to do with Jimmy's Fruiter's cart. And there's still pictures of that floating about, Jimmy the Fruiter's cart. Aye.
Tremendous. You almost gave us a wee poem earlier on when you were talking about the school and the playground. Did you find it?
Yes, I've got it here, and this was written. This was for my collection called 0 Hours, which came out in 2016. So it's quite a recent collection. This in fact, this would be the last collection I put out. And this is a poem called The Altoon Skill, and it was me walking by and watching them restoring the building at the time when it was shut down, and thinking of the memories in it. And I would climb up onto the wall at the corner with my phone, and I would take all the workers would be, and I would be taking photos, and they come over, and I think they were worried in case I was somebody for the DSS. It was maybe going to catch some of them out or something. But I says, no, I'm just you're sort of a local crazy poet getting a few images to write a poem about. And this is the poem, The Altoon Skill. The council's daying up the Altoon Skill. A banner proudly boasts its restoration. Swarms o' men in safety hats buzz round, and scaffolding pleads every eke and end. Gleg, slaters slate, and jiners plain and saw, whilst boys with barras bringe and ball and shout, with clatty glore clung to their steel-taed bits. I'm stood with camera, capturing these things. A nameless man stood just a yonter yet, gathering up a hauntle photographs. The old gym's been torn down for ains I danced with Anne McSween, the doctor's bonny lassie. Blue-eyed, her chestnut hair tied back in ribbons that floated on an air of fiddle tunes. A caterpillar digger trundles ever, what ains was its braw varnished wooden flare. Now just a mound of mangled steel and glass. £9 million they're spending on this refit. There's muckle drains and reinforcing mesh, and dumpers carting jopping loads of concrete. A termite nest of ident eager labour. I notice in ye corner of the yard, neatly stacked the ane on tap o' t'other, all the old cast iron radiators, painted brown, else other shades o' hairst. And something draws me to the chain link fence, the bairnted minding of some Cranrach playground, full o' screeching wains and slides o' ice, ponds rid raw with flinging piles of snowballs, then clattering back to classes at the bell to roast our fingers on that scalding iron. It makes me smile to think now there they lie, just 2 or 3 feet awa' upon a pallet. I racks my horn to Ablin's reach and touch them, but I and on they bide, just out o' reach. The Altoon Skill.
Tremendous.
But that was, I thought they were a great metaphor, you know, these wooden pallets with all the old cast iron radiators piled up on them, and the fact that, you know, you were outside the gate, again, which was a metaphor for time and distance, and you could almost reach and touch the past, but you couldn't really. You know, the past remains out of reach for all that we would like to go back and touch it or see it, you know. So it was just a nice minding. And I got to read that poem at the opening of the Toon Skill when it was all opened again, and my pal Tom Hunter came and got the ribbon and said a few words, and I got to read the poem, which is up in the wall in a frame in there now. So there we go.
Fantastic. But let's go back again, but maybe not quite as far back, and let's talk about what happened after school and when you started working. Let's get out.
Well, there wasn't I was quite a kind of a wild and rebellious kind of young fella. You know, I get very interested in the punk rock movement when it came along. Briefly, I had been, I had been interested in the kind of what other contemporary music was going on at the time. The 70s kind of glitter type music, maybe with sort of a Bowie and the Sweet and T-Rex, these kind of things, and the kind of the sort of prog rock bands like Led Zeppelin and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, whom I liked a lot. But that was all swept away in the great deluge of punk rock, and I said, "Oh, this is for me. This is my generation." And I can mind going to tremendous concerts, seeing the Clash at the Apollo in Glasgow, and Susie and the Banshees, and the Buzzcocks, Joy Division. I saw Joy Division live with Ian Curtis, so that was a great time. So I could not be taught at the school. I was away in a wee world of my own, dreaming of being a pop star, and so I kind of begun a long tradition of failing exams. So I couldn't go to university or college, and I had no inkling at that time. I wasn't given much kind of encouragement really to go into any kind of higher education. I know Jim had got an apprenticeship at the coal board as an engineer. I know Jim's a good engineer. You know, he's a very able engineer. But I wasn't cut out for the engineering. As a wit said, I couldn't put a nut in a monkey's mouth, Biggie. And but yet, for somehow or other, I ended up going to this exam. There was a kind of an aptitude test, shall we call it, an aptitude test in the assembly hall at Cumnock Academy. And all the desks were set out for the usual exams. And there must have been about 100 boys there was sitting at these desks with this test. And there was very taxing questions like spell hammer and such like. And one boy in particular, whose family will be known but shall remain nameless to protect his reputation, was caught cheating and was promptly marched out of the hall. I can remember that quite vividly. But anyway, I must have passed the aptitude. I was one of the brilliant pupils that could spell hammer, and so I got accepted in to be an apprentice engineer with the coal board. So I spent 4 or 5 years doing the apprenticeship and happily failing every exam they ever invented. You know, I was just not caught out of it. I mean, maths and arithmetic, you know, the two prerequisites probably for engineering were my worst subjects. You know, I loved reading. I was a voracious reader, and you know, was reading heavy duty stuff at the time, like Jean-Paul Sartre and Heidegger and all these existentialist philosophers and things. So logarithms and algebra remained a mystery to me, I'm afraid. So I failed all the exams at the Tech, and then I failed the practical exams as well. But having said that, I enjoyed my time at the pit, working at the pit. You know, I was always very happy-go-lucky. You know, I just would fling on anything at me and I'll stole it, basically. You know, I'll just happily go on with it. And I loved the camaraderie and the banter and the laughs and the carry on. It really was. It was a real university of life. And that has a Burnsian suit to it, because Burns said there was a certain type of education or knowledge that couldn't be gotten in your schools. And that is very true. There is a kind of common sense sort of knowledge in education that you can only get, I think, by working in an industry. And it was a real education. It really was. And I had some great fun times there. And I've got a few photographs of that as well. And I've written about it. I wrote about latterly in that job, of course. We had the great miners' strike here in 84, 85, when Jim Thompson was waving his pie line at us for the picket line and things like that. And theirs was out our trousers, of course. And that was a tough time. For me personally, actually, quite kind of ironically or paradoxically, I had quite a good strike year because I was young and single, I was playing in groups at the weekend. I was playing in groups and bands, and some very popular bands in Ayrshire at that time. Midnight Express and Dance Faction. These were hugely successful local sort of pop bands playing the clubs and pubs. So I was getting a wage for that. So I had a very happy strike year. And the miners, the young miners, I can remember them all. Ricky Allen and Gudge and Blaw McDickens and all these boys up at the swimming pool, and had it was the best tans we ever had in our life. It was that fabulous summer in 1984, which was great for getting a tan, but no very helpful as far as coal supplies went. So that was a tough year for everybody, and that finished the coal industry. That finished it. And I hung on for maybe a year in the coal industry after that, and I could see the writing was on the wall. And I left the coal industry to go into psychiatric nursing, because it seemed like I wanted to do something worthwhile. And there was a wee story behind that too, I suppose. We were all skint, nobody had any money at that time. You know, the only savings we had, if you had a car, it was all gone. So we had no money. So I couldn't consider going to higher education because I needed some kind of income coming in. So I needed to get new skills and a new career with something that maybe paid a kind of wage while you were training. So nursing was the perfect thing for that. And I left, I would be 25 years old, and it was the end of January 31st, 1986, on a Friday, and I finished my shift at the pit, and I took my steel take-up pit bits off, and I took my pit helmet off, and I took them to what they called the duck hopper conveyor belt, just in the pit head where I worked, and I stood in this kind of wee platform with the conveyor belt, and I dropped my boots and my helmet onto the conveyor belt, and I watched them go up the conveyor belt into the duck hopper, and that was the end of my career in mining. And I walked to the showers in my Stoke and Soles, and I showered, and I went and left, and I never went back. And on the Monday morning, the 3rd of February, I commenced training as a psychiatric nurse at the Crichton Royal at Dumfries, because I couldn't have a break. I couldn't have a break between one career, because I had no money. I had no money to go on holiday. So that was me. I went straight from one career on the Friday to a whole new world on the Monday.
Wow. Fantastic. Rab, you briefly mentioned Buns there, and I think maybe this would be a good time for us to start talking about your interest in Buns, and also talk a bit about your own poetry. And I'll get Jim to do that, and maybe we can come back towards the end about any other conversations about your career in the NHS and such like. Okay, Jim.
Right, no bother. Well, great to have you here. And I remember my first minor strike was 74, and that was a hoot. It really was. That was an education for a wee boy at that time, come there, third and Cumber. However, how did you collide with Buns in the first place?
Well, I suppose I can remember an exact moment in a way. I'll just lift this object here. My mother and father would go to, I mean, they were kind of small town village business people, you know. So they would be friendly with other business folk about the town, like say Campbell Hunter and Pat and Alec McKechnie. That was the kind of circles they moved in, and they would go to different events and support things that kind of section of society went to. And one of the things was they used to have a band dance up the Afton, and I think it was here. I think there was a wee hall or some kind of place up at the water treatment works, away up at the head of Afton. There was a band dance held up there, and I went to it, and there was a raffle, and my father won a prize, and they come back, and the next day he handed me this. And it's Buns Poems and Songs, and it's the Oxford. Very luckily, it was this collection of Buns' poems, because this ties in. It's edited by James Kinsey, and this is James Kinsley, of course, did the famous 3-volume set of Buns' works. So later, much later on, you know, you were able to go to the numbers, the poem, the way the poems are numbered in this book, and all the connections in it, and it was a good stepping stone to take you into maybe the serious world of Buns. But that was much later on. But again, I'd be about 14-year-old. I would be 14-year-old, and he gave me this, and I started dipping into it. I wouldn't make much sense of it at the time, but there was certain poems, you know, the famous poems like Tia Mouse, Tia Louse, and Tam O'Shanter, I suppose, that you could make sense of and read. And so that was my first experience, and that became my Buns book. And I suppose a lot of the boys in the Buns world and the Buns club type of world, the anybody that recites the poems or is interested will have a Buns book. Some of them will have lots and lots of Buns books. I've got lots and lots of Buns books. Many of the boys in the club will have a collection. But this was my main Buns book. And it's proved a faithful friend over the years. And it's very, very battered and full of labels here, all the different kind of the main poems that I'm interested in, or I'm even interested in at the moment. So I'll go back to that and have them all. And it's got to such a kind of battered extent that I decided that recently that I should buy another copy of it. To have you in it in kind of decent condition, you know, to preserve this historic one, you know. But I do like I wouldn't take that to suppers now. I'd take something else maybe, but because I was getting a bit battered. But it could tell stories, this book. It could really tell stories. And the version, for instance, Tam O'Shanter in it here, and the first page is a big tear in it there. And this was taken on 2 or 3 occasions to the wild rattling squad Buns supper that Rowley was involved in, and various others. Brun used to go to it too, and a lot of characters. And there was a tradition evolved at the rattling squad Buns supper. We used to have it in bothies. You know, we would have it in the sort of Polskirk bothy away up the Scar Valley. And we had it there for years. And then we decided to become sophisticated. So we had it at the outdoor centre at Lochdoon. I'm trying to remember the name of that again. What was its name? It was the outdoor centre at Lochdoon. And of course, they wouldn't hire it out to a bunch of drunks for a wild Buns supper, you know, which was fueled by alcohol and other things. And it was a wild night. And so we used to book it under the name of the Princess Street Ramblers. We were the Princess Street Ramblers. And the tradition evolved where when it came to midnight at the Rattling Squad supper, all the lights would be put out, and you would give candles, and this book, and sometimes other boys are about, would be passed round from 1 to 1, and everybody at the supper read a line or two for Tam O'Shanter. And it was great entertainment because 2 or 3 of the boys were dyslexic, and it was a joy to hear them reading Tam O'Shanter. It really was. And there's a big Doddy Connell crease still in the page here, you know, for that Rattling Squad supper 25 years ago. So that is a very special Buns book to me. It's followed me through my strange and zany career at Buns suppers all my days. But I mean, I got that, I say, when I was a 14-year-old, but I didn't really get into going to Buns suppers till I was in my early 30s, because I was playing in groups and bands. That was my thing. I played in groups and pop groups and bands for decades. And then in my mid-30s, I think you get to an age as a kind of youngish man where you're searching for something a bit more profound. And I think for boys, mostly boys for this area, if you were looking for something kind of more profound that you could grasp, then it was Robert Burns. And the poetry of Robert Burns opens a door into a very, very, a huge world. It opens a door into sort of a philosophy and religion and culture and manhood, and being a mature man. So Burns is a key that opens into a whole big new world. It certainly was for me, and I think for a lot of folk involved in Burns, the Burns world in one way or another.
Well, Rab, you've showed us the origins, and I think the audience are entitled to reap the rewards of your study of the origins from that book. And I know you're fond of quite a number of poems, but Smith is worth a wee thought on. So if you could give us a recitation of your choice, but I've been trying to influence you.
Well, I've been, as you know, I've been under the influence on many occasions, so this isn't a new experience to me, Jim. So, the Epistle to James Smith is a particular favourite of mine, because I think it's Burns talking about being a poet and what it entails, and his life at that time. And Smith was who was apparently a wee shilpit crater, a wee guy about 5 feet, but a real live wire by all accounts. And Burns' big buddy in Mauchline at that time, and I think the two of them would get into a lot of scrapes and fun together. And there is a real sense of fun in the poem. But to me, it also shows Burns on his kind of roller coaster of sort of bipolarness. There's peaks and troughs constantly in this poem. 1 minute his mood's away up there, and then he's away down here. It's quite it really is quite a tour de force, I think. And he talks about the life and I'll just read the poem because it is a total high-end of praise to life itself and what can he make us in life. The Epistle to James Smith. Dear Smith, the sleest pocky thief that e'er attempted stealth or reef, ye surely hae some warlock brief ever human hearts, for ne'er a bosom yet was proof against your erts. For me, I swear by sun and moon and every star that blinks abin, you've cost me 20 pair of shin, just gone to see ye, and every other pair that's done, mere ta'en am way. That old capricious carlin nature, to make amends for scrimpet stature, she's turned you off a human creature in her first plan, and in her freaks on every feature, she's wrote the man. Just now, I've ta'en the fit o' rhyme, my balmy noddles working prime, my fancy yerk it up sublime with hasty summon. Give ye a leisure moment's time to hear what's coming. Some rhyme, a neighbour's name to lash, some rhyme vain thought for need for cash, some rhyme to court the country clash, a raid and raise a din, for me an aim I never fash, a rhyme for fun. The star that rules my luckless lot has fated me the russet coat, and damned my fortune to the groat, but in requite has blessed me with a random shot o' country wit. This while my notions ta'en a sklent to try my fate in good black print, but still the mair I'm that way bent, something cries, "Hully, read ye, honest man, tuck tent, you'll show your folly." There's other poets, much your betters, far seen in Greek, deep men o' letters, who thought they had insured their debtors of future ages. New moths deform in shapeless tatters their unknown pages. Then farewell hopes of laurel boughs to garland my poetic brows. Henceforth I'll rove where busy ploughs are whistling thrang, and teach the lanely hechs and house my rustic sang. I'll wander on with tentless heed, how never halting moments speed, till fate shall snap the brittle thread, then all unknown, I'll lay me weigh the inglorious deed, forgot and gone. But why a death begin a tale? Just now we're leaving, sound and hail, then top and maintop crowd the sail, heave care o'er side, and large before enjoyment's gale. Let's tap the tide. This life, so far as I understand, is enchanted fairyland, where pleasure is the magic wand that wielded richt, marks hours like minutes, hand in hand, dance by full licht. The magic wand then let us wield, for aince that 45 spilled, see crazy, weary, joyless, ield with wrinkled face, comes hosting, hurtling over the field with creeping pace. When aince life's day draws near the gloaming, then farewell vacant, careless roaming, and farewell cheerful tankards foaming and social noise, and farewell dear deluding woman, the joy of joys. Ah, life, how pleasant in thy morning! Young fancies raise the hills adorning, cold pausing cautions lessen scorning. We frisk away like schoolboys at the expected warning to joy and play. We wander there, we wander here, with eye the rose upon the brier, unmindful that the thorn is near among the leaves, and though the puny wind appear, short while it grieves. Some lucky find a flowery spot for which they never toiled nor swat. They drink the sweet and eat the fat, but care or pain, and haply aye the barren hut with high disdain. With steady aim some fortune chase, keen hope does every sinew brace, through fair, through foul they urge the race and seize the prey. Then canny in some cosy place they close the day. And others, like your humble servant, fair whites, nae rules nor roads observing, to right or left eternal swerving, they zigzag on, till cursed with age, obscure and sterving, they often groan. Alas, what bitter toil and straining, but truth with peevish poor complaining, is fortune's fickle luna waning? E'en let her gang. Beneath what light she has remaining, let's sing our song. My pen I here fling to the door, and kneel ye powers and warm implore, though I should wander terra o'er in all her climes, grant me but this, I ask nae more, aye routh o' rhymes. Gie dreeping rose to country lairds, till icicles hang frae their beards. Gie fine braw clays to fine life gears, and maids o' honour, and yill and whisky, gie to cairds until they scunner. A title, Deemster merits it. A garter, gie to Willie Pitt. Gie wealth to some beledgered sit in cent per cent, but gie me real sterling wit, and I'm content. Well, ye're pleased to keep me hale, I'll sit down o'er my scanty meal bit, water brose or muslin kale with cheerful face, as long as the muses dinna fail to say the grace. An anxious ee, I never throws a hint my lug or past my nose. I jute beneath misfortune's blows as well as I may, sworn foe to sorrow, care, and prose. I rhyme away. O ye douce folk that live by rule, grave, tideless blooded, calm and cool, compared with you, oh, fool, how much unlike. Your hearts are just a standing pool, your lives a dyke Nay hair-brained sentimental traces in your unlettered nameless faces, and arioso trowels and graces ye never stray, but gravissimo solemn basses ye hum away. Ye are said grave, nae doot you're wise, nae fairly though ye do despise the harum-scarum ram-stam boys, the rattling squad. I see ye upward cast your eyes, ye ken the road, whilst but I shall haud me there. For you, I'll scarce gag onywhere. Then Jamie, I shall say nae mair, but quit my sang, content with you to mak a pair, where'er I gang.
Fantastic. I think you're the best I've ever heard reading that, Rab. That was tremendous.
That's because I'm the only one that reads it now.
Well,
no, I totally grasp the poem. You know, I get. Yeah. I mean, I think there's some folk learn Buns' poems, and Wayne's learn Buns, and they don't really, but they can, you know, read it off by rote, but they don't really understand the poem. You know, but I've delved deeply into these poems and these works, and as a poet myself, as Buns said in the vision, he talks about, the mighty, some poets have been like the mighty oak trees, but beneath the forest monarch's mighty shade, the lowly daisy, holds its sway, or something like that. He talks about the great poets are the great mighty oaks, but the wee daisies, the wee tiny things, the small poets have their place, their place to play as well. I don't think you need to be in the top 10 or the higher echelons of the poetry world to write poetry that's meaningful and can touch people's hearts. Only poet worth their salt can do that, and their work has merit. And I've worked long and hard at writing poetry, for decades now, and I have read widely and deeply, and I understand the mechanics of it. But it's not just the mechanics of it. I think true poets are born. I don't think you can go to a university course or a creative writing course and just come off the conveyor belt at the end as a poet. There's more to it than that. And I think having a certain maturity when maybe you start writing it is a useful thing too, because you've got a much deeper well of experience to draw upon. And some folks spend their life in academia and never leave that world. They've little experience of the reality of working life and real life. But I worked in the pits for 8 years. I was in psychiatric nursing and intensive care wards for decades. I've seen the raw edge of life, and that is a thing that can't be gotten in your schools, and it can't be both. It is an experience, and Buns had that in spades as well. He didn't go to a university, but yet the work that he has written, compared with other poets that did go to university, his work is every bit as important and as vital. Is utterly vital stuff that he was writing. McDermott too. McDermott was an academic as such. And his work is equally important. There's something about Scottish poets, man or woman. Edith Ann Robertson, Violet Jacob, fabulous poet, Liz Lockhead. These are folk that have lived a life, and I've got something to say that's worth saying. Whether folk have got the wit or the nous to realise that or no. And poetry has a pure audience these days. It is a coin that has lost its bright mintage. It's not something that is generally valued by the general population anymore, which is their great loss. I think something should be done to put poetry back in its rightful place in the pantheon of what's important in our lives. Because when it comes to the great occasions and the great triumphs and the great disasters, we do the turn to the poets to express what humans need to hear expressed at these times. And to my mind, only poetry can do that. And that's the thing that Buns did.
Rab, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. But I think what you've said proves that we need to spend some more time with you. We're running out of time for this episode, but I wonder if you'd consider letting us do another episode with you, because we've only touched on your own poetry. We've hardly really touched on Buns and your knowledge of Buns, and we've got all the things like your interest in bikes and the work you've done with the NHS, and the time you spent since that working on problems in the NHS. So I think we could justify another episode. Jim, what do you think?
I mean, I can do some more poems for you. I had a few things can you looked at, because there was the whole series of poems that I did when they were doing that sort of what was it called again? Creative Buns thing in Kilmarnock at the Dick Institute a number of years ago. What year was that? That was around about 2008, 2009, about the homecoming year. So there was a whole series of poems that were written that had titles that were taken from Burns's works, but they were new poems. You know, there was a link to Burns. So there's a whole load of them.
Well, I'll tell you what. How about we finish off this episode with maybe a fairly short poem of your own, just to give people a wee flavour.
I had that.
And then we can arrange another time to record another episode with you, if you don't mind doing that.
Right. Well, I'll just repeat briefly what I said there, and I'll read a short poem.
Perfectly.
Okay. Oh, this was for the collection Life Sentence, which came out in 2009. It was just coming up on the homecoming year in Scotland. And there was a big project that was organised at Kilmarnock, this Creative Buns project. One of the things Jimmy Gibson was involved in this was building a replica of the Wilson's printing press, which are still, I think it's still in the Dick Institute. Yeah, fabulous creation. And they gave me a commission to write a series of poems relating to the connection with Buns. So I think there's about maybe 8 or 10 poems in this sequence. And they all use the title of each of these poems is the title is a line that's been borrowed for Buns, but it's a new poem. Poems like Hail Caledonia is in, and I Saw Thy Pulses Maddening Play is another, With Serpent Sly Inspections another. They've all got names. Good Black Print, which was taken for Smith, you know, that was the title of one of these poems. But there's 2 very short ones here. I'll read the 2 of them because they're quite interesting. So this one, the first one is a wee short poem, and it deals with Buns as a lover and an admirer of women, shall we say. And it's called "And brocht a Patrick to the Grun, a Bonny Hen," which was for his epistle to John Rankin. Pulchritude, you'd heave up in a sang, Highland Mary, Peggy, Bonny Ann. Impulsively your tender heart would gang, looking for some lass to garret stang. Lovely Polly Stewart, handsome Nell, imploring, begging, can I cease to care? Pleading, thine am I, my faithful fair. And you, a fornicator, truth be telled. Aye, when thone famous Nine and Phoebus inspired you to dip old Stumpy's nib, the judge would be to in with parlance glib, kindly meant, but laced with darker purpose. Every honeyed word and crafted phrase, notched to the bow and deadly in the chase. Buns a lover. And this wee short in here is Hail Caledonia, the phrase which comes from the prologue spoken by Mr. Woods. So this was inspired by a visit to Sean Bittle's famous The Bookshop in Wigton, the bookshop, which is like a labyrinth of books, that show. And it's how that the whole world of Scotland can be condensed into his Scottish section in that show. And it goes from the sublime as you will hear, the ridiculous. Hail Caledonia! Among the serried ranks of history, Hieland clans and regiments, distilleries, Goring's Fantouche, Scotland's autobiography, Covenanters vaunty o' their bigotry, McDermott's twisted face and RLS, tenement tales, Couthie, aye and Canty, by Lavinia, Derwent or Cliff Hanley, Buns' sentimental doggerel verse, Robert Crawford's epic Scotland's books, Alan Warner's uniformed Lolitas, Cunningham Graham's sultry senoritas, Irvin Welsh's junkies with their plooks. Oh, Scotland, warded here athin these boons, steek it atween our Wally and the Bruns. And of course, that there's quite a few phrases in that wee short poem, and the Buns been written off there as sentimental doggerel. Well, that was the quote at the time by Jeremy Parksman.
That's
Jeremy
right.
Parksman had described Buns as sentimental doggerel. So I thought, oh well, we'll stick that in the poem, you know, it's of its moment, you know. So there you go, two wee Buns-related poems.
Well, thanks very much for that, Rab. And that's been tremendous. What a way to finish the first episode of My Life with Robert Burns, Rab Wilson. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.